Marcus Johnson believed in one thing: brute strength. After years of wrestling trees and wielding an axe, he was certain no man standing still in a fancy uniform could match real-world grit. So when he stormed toward a royal guard at Buckingham Palace, axe in hand and pride swelling in his chest, he expected intimidation, maybe even fear. What he got instead was something that shattered his assumptions, humbled his rage, and left an entire crowd stunned. Because not all steel is swung. Some stands perfectly still. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, its golden rays catching the gleam of polished brass buttons and the sharp crease of the guard's red tunic. The air thrummed with the usual buzz of tourists, cameras clicking, children's laughter echoing, and guides recounting tales of royal history. Yet beneath the jovial surface, a current of tension began to ripple through the crowd. It started with the heavy, deliberate thud of boots against ancient stones. Marcus Johnson, a man built like a battering ram, pushed through the tourists with the casual force of a bulldozer. His broad shoulders parted the crowd, a stained white tank top clinging to his barrel chest, soaked with sweat and dust. An axe, its steel head reflecting the morning light, swung lazily at his side. His beard, thick and unruly, framed a scowl that deepened with every step toward the lone sentry standing at his post. A murmur spread among the onlookers. Cameras lowered. Conversations faltered. People instinctively edged back, creating a wide berth around the approaching figure. No one wanted to stand between an angry man wielding an axe and his apparent target. "Oi, soldier boy!" Marcus's voice rang out, roughened by years of shouting over chainsaws and falling timber. He stopped a pace away from the guard, planting his work boots with a final, echoing stomp. "Must be nice, huh? Standing there like some bleedin' mannequin, getting paid to play dress-up while real men break their backs." The guard remained motionless, eyes fixed forward, rifle held precisely in position. His expression, if there was one, was hidden beneath the shadow of his towering bearskin hat. Protocol demanded silence, unflinching discipline. Tourists expected a living statue, and that's what they saw. But to those trained in reading body language, there was a subtle shift in his stance. The slight tension in his shoulders, the near imperceptible flex of gloved fingers adjusting grip on the rifle. Readiness. Awareness. Marcus sneered, his gaze flicking to the silent onlookers before returning to the guard. "Look at you," he scoffed. "Too good to speak to a working man? I've been felling trees for 15 years. Rain, snow, don't matter. 12-hour shifts, swinging steel till my arms scream. That's real work. Not this, standing still, polishing boots nonsense." He held up his hand, palm outward, calluses like old leather, scars crisscrossing his skin like a road map of hardship. These are from earning, an honest living, not sitting pretty in some fancy uniform. Parents began pulling their children back, sensing the shift from spectacle to something darker. An elderly man with a military bearing, ramrod straight despite his years, watched intently, his expression tightening. A veteran recognizes a brewing storm. "You think that rifle makes you something special?" Marcus continued, voice dropping to a growl. His knuckles whitened on the axe handle. "Bet you've never known a real day's danger. Bet you ain't never faced down a tree bigger in a house, ready to crush you if you misstep." His gaze darkened. "Bet you ain't got the guts to acknowledge a man who bleeds for his pay." Still, the guard held, unmoving, a study in self-control. That seemed to enrage Marcus further. His thick neck flushed red, veins bulging as he stepped even closer, so near now that his breath misted the guard's brass buttons. "You stand there, playing the hero for the tourists. My boy, my son, looks up to you lot, thinks you're something special. Wanted to come here today to see you. I told him what you really are, just a glorified statue." A ripple of discomfort spread through the gathering crowd. This wasn't the typical tourist taunting for a laugh. This was a powder keg of resentment and pride, fuse burning faster with every word. Marcus spat on the ground, perilously close to the guard's polished boots. "Go on then," he jeered. "Say something. Or are you too much of a coward behind that uniform? Nothing. Not a flinch. And that's when Marcus's demeanor shifted from words to something far more dangerous. His free hand tightened on the axe handle. His stance widened, weight shifting like a predator preparing to pounce. You don't get it, do you? He whispered, menace bleeding into every syllable. This ain't just talk. I'm showing you what real strength looks like. Gasps erupted from the onlookers as Marcus raised the axe, sunlight catching its edge in a blinding flash. The tension snapped taut, parents shielding children's eyes, tourists stumbling back. The veteran barked, "Stand down, lad." But his voice was lost in the rush of adrenaline surging through the crowd. The axe arced upward, heavy, deadly, deliberate. And still, the guard didn't move. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then we'll see how much you're worth, Marcus thought, muscles coiling for the swing. The air thickened with tension, each heartbeat stretching into eternity. Marcus's muscles bunched, the axe poised at its apex. Around him, the world seemed to blur, gasps and shouts from the crowd becoming distant echoes. His vision narrowed to a single point, the immovable figure before him. He won't move, Marcus thought, equal parts enraged and bewildered. Why won't he move? Then, as if time snapped back into motion, Marcus swung. The axe cut through the air with lethal speed, a gleaming arc aimed not to kill, but to shatter the guard's rifle, his stance, his pride. One blow to prove a lifetime of labor outweighed polished buttons and pomp. But the impact Marcus expected never came. In a blur so swift most missed it, steel flashed. The guard's ceremonial sword, previously unnoticed, sheathed in tradition, sliced through the air. The blade met the descending axe with a ring that echoed off the palace walls, sharp and clear. Marcus felt the shock jolt up his arms, rattling bone and pride alike. The axe recoiled, momentum reversed by a wrist flick so precise it defied comprehension. Gasps erupted. Children clung to parents, phones dropped forgotten. The elderly veteran in the crowd, who'd seen combat in places far from these royal grounds, nodded grimly. That wasn't ceremony. That was battlefield skill. Marcus stumbled back, eyes wide. What the? His words choked off as he saw the sword's tip, steady, unwavering, hover inches from his throat. Not a tremor in the guard's hand. No breath wasted. Just control. For a long, pulsing moment, neither man spoke. Around them, the crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. A pigeon flapped overhead, indifferent to the earthbound drama below. Then, the guard's voice, cool and level. Do not mistake stillness for weakness, sir. It wasn't just the words, it was how he said them. Like someone who had spoken commands under fire. Like someone who knew what it meant to face real danger. Not just falling timber, but bullets, bombs, and things that didn't give you second chances. Marcus's bravado wavered. He's not just standing there, his mind raced. He's standing ready. But pride, especially wounded pride, is a stubborn beast. Marcus shook off the doubt. Just lucky, he growled, though his voice lacked conviction. Sweat rolled down his temples, no longer from effort but realization. He raised his empty hand, showing his calloused palm. I work for a living. Swing this axe 10 hours a day. You think some fancy sword makes you better than me? The guard didn't reply. He didn't need to. The sword lowered, sliding back into its scabbard with a metallic click that seemed louder than it should have been. Final. Marcus's chest heaved. Half of him wanted to walk away, to disappear into the crowd and forget this humiliation. The other half, the part that had driven him to this moment, still burned with misplaced fury. He pointed a shaking finger at the guard. Bet you've never had to bleed for your job? Something changed in the guard's eyes then. Not anger, not pity, something deeper. Understanding. 8 years in uniform, the guard said quietly, voice carrying just enough for Marcus and the gathering crowd to hear. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Men in my unit didn't come home. I did. He paused. Standing still isn't the hard part. Living with the memories is. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Marcus's defiance faltered, gaze dropping to his boots. For all his years of back-breaking labor, all his scars, he hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected to be faced with a truth heavier than any axe. A small boy's voice piped up from the crowd, innocent, unaware. Daddy, why did the man try to hurt the soldier? The words cut deeper than any blade. Marcus swallowed hard. His shoulders sagged. I didn't. But what was there to say? I was angry? I was wrong? The veteran stepped forward, hand resting on Marcus's arm. Sometimes, lad, he said softly, it takes more strength to stand still than to swing. Marcus's gaze lifted to the guard one last time. No contempt now. Just the dawning realization that true steel isn't always in the weapon you hold. It's in the restraint you show. Marcus stood frozen, chest heaving, ears still ringing from the clash of steel. His arms, so confident moments before, now felt leaden, as if the guard's blade had cut through more than just his attack. His pride, once towering and immovable, crumbled in real time. What just happened? The question echoed in his mind, louder than the gasps of the crowd, louder than the pounding of his heart. Across from him, the guard resumed his stance, rifle held perfectly, posture immaculate. To an unknowing eye, it was as if nothing had happened. But everyone present, everyone, felt the shift. This wasn't a man in a costume. It wasn't theater. It was discipline, honed beyond what Marcus had ever imagined. You could have, Marcus faltered, words catching in his throat. You could have hurt me. But the truth twisted deeper. The guard hadn't. Despite provocation, despite the raised axe, he'd chosen control. The boy's voice from earlier broke through again. Daddy, is the man in trouble? A woman shushed him gently, but it was too late. The question lingered in the air, cutting through the tension with innocent clarity. Marcus glanced toward the voice. A young boy, maybe 6, clutched his mother's hand. His wide, curious eyes weren't angry. They weren't afraid. They were disappointed. That's worse. Marcus's gaze dropped, shame settling like a weight on his shoulders. This is what your son sees now. A man who let anger cloud his judgment. The guard finally spoke, voice low but carrying across the courtyard. Strength isn't in how hard you hit. It's in how much you can hold back. The words struck harder than the sword ever could. Marcus swallowed, throat dry. His mind replayed the past minutes. The crowd's reaction, the flash of the blade, the effortless defense. He could have humiliated me, but he didn't. A pair of police officers approached at last, weaving through the crowd. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, spoke firmly. Sir, she addressed Marcus, you're aware this could be considered assault? Her tone wasn't accusatory, but the implication was clear. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? That he was angry? That he wanted to prove a point? That he thought swinging an axe at a soldier was justifiable? None of it held water now. The guard interjected, surprising everyone. He's learned what he came to learn, he said quietly. His gaze didn't waver. Let that be enough. The officers exchanged glances. Your call, the woman muttered. To Marcus, she added, you lucked out today, mate. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, he thought. Luck had nothing to do with it. The crowd began to disperse, the initial shock giving way to whispered conversations and cautious glances. Phones that had been raised to capture a confrontation now lowered, the gravity of the moment settling over everyone. Marcus bent to pick up his axe, his symbol of strength, but it felt heavier now, as if it carried more than just steel. His fingers tightened around the handle, the once familiar grip now a reminder of just how wrong he'd been. Why didn't you? Marcus hesitated, then forced the words out. Why didn't you teach me a lesson the hard way? The guard's gaze remained steady. Sometimes, he said, showing mercy takes more strength than striking back. He paused, then added, you spoke of scars. We all have them. Not all are visible. Marcus absorbed that, guilt twisting in his gut. His scars told stories of trees felled and bones bruised. This man's scars told stories of battles fought and friends lost. And I thought standing still was easy. He glanced back at the boy, his boy still watching. What example had he set? Fury sparked by pride? Or the humility he was now forced to confront? I came to prove a point, and ended up learning one instead. Look, Marcus started, then stopped. Apologies had never come easy. He sighed, dragging a hand over his face. Didn't know what I was talking about. He met the guard's gaze. Guess I judged you by what I thought I knew. The guard offered no smile, no acknowledgement beyond a simple nod. But sometimes that's enough. Marcus turned to go, each step heavier than the last. Behind him, the guard resumed his post, rifle steady, posture perfect. The living statue, Marcus had called him. No, not a statue. A sentinel. A man who stood not for show, but for something bigger than himself. And for the first time, Marcus understood just how much strength that took. Marcus walked away from the guard post, each footstep echoing off the courtyard stones like a drumbeat of regret. His shoulders, once squared with indignation, sagged under the weight of realization. The axe, which he'd brandished so defiantly moments ago, now felt like a burden, not just of steel, but of shame. He glanced over his shoulder. The guard stood as he had from the start, motionless, poised, a red and black sentinel against the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. Yet to Marcus, everything had changed. Where he'd once seen only pomp and pageantry, he now saw resolve, the kind forged not in woodlands or work yards, but on battlefields far from the gaze of tourists. Marcus, the familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw his son pushing through the crowd, his small face pale with worry. Behind him, Marcus's wife hurried after, scolding the boy for running off. But the boy didn't stop until he stood before his father. "Dad." The boy's eyes flicked toward the guard. "Why'd you try to fight him?" Marcus opened his mouth, then shut it. How to explain pride and anger to someone who still believed heroes wore uniforms and carried swords? His gaze dropped to his son's small hands, hands unscarred, innocent, hands that look up to me. "I was wrong," Marcus said finally, kneeling to his son's level. "Thought being strong meant showing how tough you are. Thought standing still was easy." He shook his head. But that man, standing there, not moving, not reacting, that takes more guts than I've got. His son frowned, processing. "So, he's like a superhero?" Marcus chuckled, a humorless sound. "Something like that." Nearby, the crowd thinned, parents leading children away with whispered explanations. The tension that had gripped the square was easing, replaced with murmurs of respect and the occasional glance back at the guard. Cameras, once aimed to catch a laugh, now snapped photos with reverence. The elderly veteran approached again, his campaign medals catching the sunlight. "Lad," he addressed Marcus, "takes a big man to admit when he's wrong." His gaze shifted to the boy, and an even bigger one to show his son what humility looks like. Marcus nodded. "Didn't come here looking for a lesson." He glanced at the guard. "Guess I got one anyway." "You and half of London," the veteran said dryly. "Don't see that every day." Marcus's wife reached them, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What happened?" she whispered. "Long story," Marcus muttered. "Short version? I picked a fight with the wrong man." His son tugged at his arm. "Can we go thank him?" Marcus hesitated. The guard's face remained impassive, eyes forward. Protocol. Would he even respond? Still, something in his son's hopeful gaze made the choice for him. They walked back toward the post. Marcus stopped a respectful distance away. "Look," he began, voice rough. "I know you ain't supposed to talk, and I ain't looking for forgiveness. Just wanted to say I was wrong. About all of it." The guard didn't move, didn't speak, but there was a subtle shift, a barely perceptible nod. "Enough." Marcus turned to his son. "See that? Sometimes a man don't need words to get his point across." The boy grinned, waving at the guard. "Thank you for being brave." A flicker, just a flicker, of acknowledgement passed through the guard's eyes. Marcus sighed, the weight in his chest finally loosening. "Come on," he said, ruffling his son's hair. "Let's get out of here before I embarrass myself more." As they walked away, Marcus glanced back one final time. The guard stood resolute, a pillar against the morning sun. To some, he was a photo opportunity. To others, a tradition. But to Marcus Johnson, he was the man who taught him what real strength looked like. The warmth of the sun seemed gentler as Marcus led his family away from the courtyard. The crowd dispersed behind them, the confrontation becoming whispers and murmurs that would soon fade into stories told over dinners and shared in online posts. But for Marcus, the lesson was carved deep into his chest, raw and undeniable. Strength isn't just muscle. It's discipline, control. His son skipped beside him, chattering about how cool the guard was. Marcus half listened, his mind still replaying the clash, the ring of steel on steel echoing in his ears. "Could have lost my head." Literally. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. A sudden commotion behind them broke his reflection. Shouts. A scream. Marcus turned instinctively. Years of working dangerous jobs had taught him to trust sudden shifts in noise. What he saw froze his blood. A man, face obscured by a hoodie, had broken from the thinning crowd. Something glinted in his hand. A blade. Not a tourist prank. Not a drunken dare. A real threat. And he was charging straight for the guard. No. The thought exploded in Marcus's mind, instinct taking over. "Get back," he barked, shoving his wife and son behind him. His heart pounded. Legs that had felt leaden moments before surged into motion. But the guard, still, silent, unwavering, did not flinch. The attacker lunged. Steel flashed. The crowd gasped, then fell into eerie silence as events unfolded faster than the eye could track. The guard moved. One fluid motion. Rifle shifted, pivot turned, ceremonial weapon transforming into something far deadlier in trained hands. The attacker's blade arced downward, intercepted mid-swing. The guard twisted, a movement honed by combat drills and battlefield experience. In a heartbeat, the would-be assailant was on the ground, disarmed, gasping for air under the guard's knee. Marcus skidded to a halt, chest heaving. I couldn't have stopped that. Not in time. His gaze darted to the attacker's dropped weapon, a combat knife, not a tourist trinket. This wasn't random. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Police sprinted in, officers shouting orders. The guard relinquished the attacker to them with calm efficiency, already stepping back into position as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had. Marcus's son clung to his leg. Daddy. Was he trying to hurt him? Yeah, Marcus whispered, adrenaline ebbing into cold realization. He was. The veteran from earlier appeared beside them, face pale but composed. I've seen men freeze in combat, he murmured. Not him. Didn't hesitate. Marcus nodded. Didn't just stand still, stood ready. The police thanked the guard, who gave a curt nod. Nothing more. His duty done, he resumed his post. Same posture, same stillness. But everyone watching now knew what lay beneath that calm exterior. Coiled steel, precise and lethal. And then, the twist that no one expected. A man in a suit approached, flashing credentials to the police. We've been tracking chatter about a potential attack, he said quietly to the officers. His gaze flicked to the guard. Didn't think they'd try it here. Marcus overheard, blood running cold. This wasn't some lone nut. It was targeted, planned. As the attacker was dragged away, he snarled through clenched teeth, "Won't stop us. Won't stop what's coming." Marcus stiffened. Us? The guard's gaze shifted, just enough to meet Marcus's eyes. Not fear. Not alarm. Awareness. And then, almost imperceptibly, the guard spoke under his breath, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. This wasn't the real attack. Marcus's stomach dropped. What? Sirens grew louder. More police flooded in. Orders barked over radios. And overhead, a low thrum, helicopters. Too much response for a single guy with a knife. Unless, then the ground trembled. Just a little. Just enough. Marcus turned toward the palace gates and saw the delivery van. Parked. Engine idling. No. Police waved at it. Move along. It didn't move. Marcus's eyes widened. Bomb! He shouted, voice raw with panic. Chaos erupted. People screamed. Officers dove for cover. But the guard didn't move. The van's back doors swung open. Flash. Sound. Deafening.